Now it's time for today's perspective, and if we talk here on France 24 of the conflict in Sudan, well, the headline is often about the latest on the war that broke out nearly 18 months ago now between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. In that battle, the Sudanese military generally recently gaining the upper hand, although the rapid support forces still control larger areas of the capital, and they continue to hit back as well. 120 people were killed in one town alone last month in the central eastern area of the country. Well, millions of people have fled the violence, but what about the story for the people of Sudan left behind? Well, in its latest report, Human Rights Watch reveals some of the terrible and terrifying conditions for people there, notably for women. And with me is Director at Human Rights Watch for the Horn of Africa, Laetitia Badder. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme then. Summarise your report for us then. I mean, what generally is the condition for women who are living and coping with the situation in Sudan?
Well, the most recent report is looking into the attacks you've just mentioned in central eastern Sudan, in the state of El Jazeera, which is south of the capital Khartoum, where just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen rapid support forces attack over 30 villages and towns. And one of the hallmarks of this conflict, and especially in terms of the conduct of the rapid support forces and their allies, has been widespread sexual violence. We documented this from the early stages of the conflict in Khartoum. Now, for much of the first year of the conflict, the rapid support forces controlled many parts of Khartoum and its sister cities, which is really a sort of metropolis of over 6 million people before the conflict started. And within the context of their occupation, we were seeing widespread rape and gang rape in particular. We were also documenting forced marriage of women and girls by the rapid support forces. But we've seen these trends in many other parts of the conflict and the country. In West Darfur, where we documented a campaign of ethnic cleansing against the ethnic Masalit community, which forced 500,000 people to flee into eastern Chad, we found that sexual violence was one of the inherent crimes of the campaign against this community. Women and girls were targeted explicitly for rape because of their identity as well. So the context is horrific. And what adds to injury for survivors has been the fact that both warring parties have repeatedly been targeting healthcare facilities since the first days of the conflict. Especially in Khartoum, we've seen a complete destruction of healthcare facilities, but also attacks on local responders, on those who are trying to respond to this sexual violence crisis. They are being attacked as a result because of these efforts.
And why is it happening? I mean, I don't mean this at all, obviously, in a flippant way, but is it just something for the soldiers to do, or is it being done deliberately as a weapon of war?
I think the context has been slightly different in different areas. As I mentioned, in West Darfur, it was very much an inherent part of this ethnic cleansing campaign against the given community. In Khartoum, in El Jazeera, what we are seeing is very much part of the deliberate campaign of harm against civilians. So what we found in Khartoum is quite often the rape was actually happening inside of people's homes. So you had rapid support forces that were occupying civilian homes. And within the context of that, they were committing sexual violence. They were massively pillaging civilian property, public property, etc. So it's really part of the gamut, I would say, of horrific abuses against civilians. And this is why in our own reporting, what we characterize this is not only widespread sexual violence, these are war crimes, but these are part of crimes against humanity, given that they are part of widespread and systematic attacks against civilians that we are seeing.
And you've also noted cases, haven't you, of forced marriage, child marriage as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this came up very much in the research in Khartoum, where some families were doing this out of desperation. They describe this on occasion as a way of protecting their female relatives. There's also obviously an economic angle. A lot of communities that have been forced to stay behind in Khartoum are people who could not afford to flee, and they're living in a context of desperation. I think it's important to remind people that for much of the last 18 months, the parts of Khartoum which are controlled by the Rapid Support Forces have been cut off by the Sudanese armed forces, the Sudanese government, from humanitarian assistance. So there is no real aid going in apart from what Sudanese merchants are able to bring in. And so people are quite desperate. So some of these decisions by families and the context of coercion in which these forced marriages are happening are also linked to the situation of desperation people are facing, once again, directly as a result of the behavior of the two warring parties.
It's not just women, is it? I mean, you've also had cases of men and boys affected by sexual violence.
Yes, in our research, we did find a handful of cases of men and boys who have also been subjected to sexual violence, either in the context of the general insecurity in the community, attacks in the streets, but also in the context of unlawful detentions. This has been a massive problem from the beginning of the conflict, massive unlawful detentions of civilians. And within that context, this is happening as well. Now, obviously, much less reported, most likely massively underreported because of the taboo, the misunderstandings of what actually constitutes sexual violence against men and boys. But what we obviously were calling for in our report is in the response by the international humanitarian community. It's also critical to think about how to ensure these victims are also being thought about and their needs responded to.
Is there anything that actually at this stage can be done about it? I mean, bearing in mind what's happening in the country, I mean, it seems as though getting in there and trying to solve the problem is impossible, isn't it?
Well, I mean, first of all, investigations need to continue. We have an international investigation into events in the whole of Sudan, which is ongoing. It was recently renewed at the Human Rights Council with important support also from African member states, notably South Africa, which is incredibly important and need to continue. But there also need to be consequences. When we were investigating the sexual violence trends in Khartoum, the Rapid Support Forces responded to us, sent us a code of conduct. In their code of conduct, they didn't even prohibit sexual violence. And we've not only seen a complete lack of commitment to prohibiting and to taking actions against this on paper, we've obviously not seen any action in practice. The Sudanese armed forces have established a war crimes commission, but this is only to investigate abuses by the Rapid Support Forces, not abuses by their own forces. We've also documented cases of sexual violence by the Sudanese armed forces in areas they control. And on the Rapid Support Forces side, we've not seen any evidence of them taking action against their forces. So there needs to be consequences. Just in the last few days, positively, the UN Security Council has finally sanctioned two RSF commanders, one of whom we had named in our reporting on West Darfur for having command responsibility over the campaign of ethnic cleansing in West Darfur. So you need this sort of global concerted messaging that directly as a result of the human rights violations commanders are overseeing, there will be consequences. But what is clear to us is right now, nowhere is safe for civilians in Sudan. And so what is critical is for there to be a physical protection mission on the ground. And the next few weeks are critical in this regard. The UK has the presidency at the Security Council. They will be holding tomorrow a meeting on Sudan. And given the recent Secretary General report on Sudan, which highlights the devastating context on the ground, it is critical for the UN Security Council and the AU to work together to start rolling out a protection of civilian mission and sending that mission on the ground as soon as possible.
Laetitia Badder, thanks very much for joining us on the programme there, Director of Human Rights Watch for the Horn of Africa. Thank you.